The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Fort Kearny, Nebraska Territory, when Rosston Drake first heard the commotion. The year was 1863, and like most frontier settlements in those troubled times, Fort Kearny existed in a strange limbo between civilization and lawlessness, between the old ways and what might someday be. A tall man with broad shoulders and weather-beaten skin, Rosston adjusted his worn Stetson and turned his gaze toward the gathering crowd at the edge of town. At 32, Rosston had seen his share of the worst humanity had to offer. The Civil War raged back east, but out here, different kinds of battles were fought daily. He'd spent the last decade working cattle drives, mining claims, and occasionally hunting bounties when times got lean. Fort Kearny had been meant as just another stop along his journey westward, but something about the commotion ahead made him pause. "What's all the fuss about, Mick?" Rosston asked the livery owner as he secured his dun quarter horse to the hitching post. "Auction's set for sundown," Mick replied, not meeting Rosston's eyes. "Caldwell's selling off that homestead he foreclosed on last month. Heard he's selling everything: livestock, equipment, and the help." Rosston's jaw tightened. "The help, you mean people?" Mick nodded grimly. "The Pruitt place. Family that worked it got themselves into debt. Got a Mexican fella and his daughter. Caldwell's claiming they're indentured servants with a contract he now owns." "That ain't legal," Rosston muttered, his hand instinctively brushing against the Colt revolver on his hip. "Might not be, but Sheriff Dobbs is Caldwell's cousin, so who's to say otherwise?" Mick shrugged. "You best stay out of it, Drake. You're just passing through." Rosston had indeed planned to continue west come morning, but something in him couldn't let this pass. He'd fought briefly for the Union before deciding the war wasn't his fight. But this selling human beings, this was something he couldn't abide. Not after what he'd seen growing up in southern Illinois, where his father had helped escaping slaves on the Underground Railroad. The crowd had grown to about 40 people by the time Rosston reached the makeshift auction block, really just the back of a wagon with its tailgate down. Lawrence Caldwell, a portly man with a greedy gleam in his eye, stood beside the wagon, checking his pocket watch. Next to him stood Sheriff Dobbs, whose star seemed to shine a little less brightly in the fading daylight. Behind the wagon, 3 figures huddled together. An elderly Mexican man with dignity in his bearing despite his circumstances, a younger man who appeared to be his son, and a young woman, perhaps 20 or 21, whose face was partially obscured by her long, dark hair. "Folks, we're about ready to begin," Caldwell announced, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Got some fine farming equipment from the Pruitt place, 2 work horses, a milk cow, and these fine workers who come with a 5-year contract of service." He gestured to the 3 people as if they were part of the livestock. Rosston pushed his way closer, earning some glares from the locals who recognized him as an outsider. That's when he saw her face clearly for the first time. The young woman looked up, and even in the dimming light, Rosston could see the tracks of tears on her dust-streaked face. Her eyes, though they weren't defeated. There was a fire there, a defiance that struck him. "We'll start the bidding with the farming equipment," Caldwell continued. "Got a good plow, some hand tools." Rosston barely heard the man's words. He was transfixed by the young woman who now stared directly at him. No, not at him, through him, as if she were looking at something far beyond this terrible moment. The auction proceeded, with locals half-heartedly bidding on the equipment. Most seemed uncomfortable with the proceedings but unwilling to challenge Caldwell openly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, lanterns were lit, casting the scene in an eerie glow. "Now for the help," Caldwell announced, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "We've got Manuel Ortiz, experienced farmer, knows cattle and horses. His son, Carlos, strong back, good worker, and his daughter, Willow." Rosston's head snapped up at the unusual name. "Her mother was American," Caldwell explained, noting the confused looks. "Woman named her Willow Pruitt before she passed. Girl speaks good English, can cook, clean, tend garden, might make someone a good wife." He winked, eliciting nervous laughter from some men in the crowd. Willow's face flushed with shame and anger as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Her father placed a protective hand on her shoulder, but was roughly pushed aside by one of Caldwell's men. "I'll start the bidding at $50 for the lot of them," Caldwell called out. "Who'll give me 50?" A few hands raised tentatively. Rosston's blood boiled as he watched the girl Willow bite her lip to keep from crying out. "I've got 50, who'll give me 60? 75, called a rough-looking man near the front. "I've got 75. "Who'll give me, this stops now," Rosston's voice cut through the night air like a whip crack. The crowd parted as he stepped forward, hand resting on his revolver. "This here's a private auction, stranger," Sheriff Dobbs said, moving toward Rosston. "You're welcome to bid or move along." "No one should be sold like cattle," Rosston replied, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "These people aren't property." Willow's eyes locked with his, a flicker of hope kindling within them. "They signed a contract," Caldwell sputtered, producing a wrinkled document from his coat. "Legally binding." "A contract they couldn't read, I'd wager," Rosston replied. "And even if they could, indenture doesn't mean ownership. You can't sell them to another master." "The law," began Sheriff Dobbs. "The law says human beings can't be bought and sold, Sheriff," Rosston interrupted. "President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation made that clear enough." "That's for Negro slaves," Caldwell protested. "These are Mexican laborers who owe a debt." "A debt to the Pruitts, maybe, not to you," Rosston countered. He turned to address the crowd. "Folks, you all know this isn't right. Whatever your feelings about the war or the government, you know in your hearts this isn't right." A murmur ran through the assembled townspeople. Some nodded in agreement while others looked away, ashamed. "How much is their debt?" Rosston asked, turning back to Caldwell. The man's eyes narrowed. $200. Rosston knew that was likely inflated, but he also knew arguing would get him nowhere. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. Counting out gold coins, he placed them on the tailgate of the wagon. $200, he said. "Their debt is paid. They're free to go." Caldwell's face reddened with anger. "Now see here, take the money, Caldwell," came a voice from the crowd. It was Mick from the livery. "Take it and let them go." Other voices joined in agreement. The sheriff, sensing the shift in the crowd's mood, stepped back. Caldwell glowered at Rosston but snatched up the coins. "Fine. They're yours, but they're leaving town tonight. I don't want to see their faces come morning." "They're not mine," Rosston replied firmly. "They're free, and they'll go where they please." He turned to the Ortiz family. Manuel's face was a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. Carlos looked stunned, and Willow, her tears had stopped, replaced by an expression of wonderment that made Rosston's heart skip a beat. "Come with me," he said softly. "You'll be safe." As the crowd dispersed, some nodding approvingly at Rosston, others scowling at Caldwell, Rosston led the Ortiz family away from the auction site. He could feel Willow's gaze on him as they walked toward the small boarding house at the edge of town. "Why would you do this for strangers, senor?" Manuel asked as they walked. Rosston glanced at Willow before answering. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because no one deserves to be treated as less than human." Willow looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying a slight accent that Rosston found immediately enchanting. Little did he know that this moment, this simple act of decency, would change the course of his life forever. The West was still wild, still dangerous, but in that moment, Rosston Drake found something worth fighting for beyond his own survival. Mrs. Henshaw, the boarding house owner, was initially reluctant to house the Ortiz family, but relented when Rosston paid for 2 weeks in advance. "I'll need to find work," Manuel said as they settled into the small but clean room. "We cannot accept charity forever." "I might be able to help with that," Rosston replied, "but first, get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." As he turned to leave, Willow caught his arm. "Why did you really help us, Mr. Drake?" Her touch sent an unexpected warmth through him. "When I saw your tears," he admitted, "I couldn't stand by and do nothing." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his soul. "There aren't many men like you left in this world." "Maybe there are," he said. "They just need reminding of who they can be." With that, he tipped his hat and stepped out into the cool night air, unaware that his planned journey westward had just been indefinitely postponed. Morning came with the persistent crowing of a rooster and the gentle bustle of Fort Kearny awakening to a new day. Rosston had spent an uneasy night in his small room at the boarding house, his mind filled with thoughts of Willow's tear-streaked face and the fire in her eyes. He'd done the right thing, he was certain, but now he faced the question of what came next. He washed and dressed quickly, then headed downstairs to find the Ortiz family already seated at Mrs. Henshaw's dining table. Willow looked up as he entered, and the small smile that graced her lips sent an unexpected flutter through his chest. "Mr. Drake," Manuel greeted him, standing respectfully. "Please join us. Mrs. Henshaw has been most kind." The boarding house owner, a widow in her 50s with sharp eyes but a good heart, merely nodded as she placed a plate of biscuits on the table. "Any man who stands up to Lawrence Caldwell deserves a decent breakfast," she said matter-of-factly. As they ate, Rosston learned more about the Ortiz family's situation. They had come north from Texas 5 years earlier, seeking work after drought had devastated their small farm. The Pruitts had hired them, promising fair wages and eventually a small plot of land of their own. But Thomas Pruitt had fallen ill last winter, and his passing left his wife overwhelmed with debt. "Mrs. Pruitt was kind," Willow explained, her voice soft but clear. "She taught me to read English, to write. She treated us like family, but when she took sick too, Caldwell came. He said the farm was his now, that we were part of the property. Mrs. Pruitt would never have allowed it," Manuel added, his weathered face creased with sorrow. "She died just last month. Caldwell moved quickly after that." Carlos, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "We tried to leave to find work elsewhere, but Caldwell had men watching us, said we'd be arrested as thieves if we took one step off the property without his permission." Rosston's jaw tightened, and the sheriff went along with it. "Sheriff Dobbs does whatever Caldwell tells him, Mrs. Henshaw interjected as she refilled their coffee cups. "Has done since they were boys. Caldwell's father owned half the county back then, and Lawrence thinks he's entitled to the same." "What will you do now?" Rosston asked the family. Manuel exchanged glances with his children. "We must find work. Perhaps move on to another town where Caldwell has no influence." "That won't be necessary," came a new voice from the doorway. They turned to see Mick from the livery standing there, hat in hand. "Morning, folks. Mrs. Henshaw, sorry to interrupt breakfast." "What brings you here, Mick?" Rosston asked. "Word of what happened last night has spread," Mick explained. "A few of us got to talking. The Wilson place needs hands for the summer season. Old man Wilson's arthritis is acting up something fierce, and his sons are both off fighting in the war." Manuel's eyes brightened. "I know cattle, horses. We worked the Pruitt farm for 5 years. "That's what I told Wilson," Mick nodded. "He's offering fair wages and the use of the old foreman's cabin. It ain't much, but it's clean and solid." "And Caldwell?" Rosston asked, his concern evident. Mick's expression hardened. "Wilson's place is outside town limits. Caldwell has no authority there, and Wilson's got 6 ranch hands who aren't afraid of Caldwell or his cronies." Relief washed over the Ortiz family's faces. "When can we start?" Manuel asked eagerly. "Today, if you're willing," Mick replied. "I've got my wagon outside. Can take you there after breakfast." As the family expressed their gratitude, Rosston felt a curious mix of satisfaction and unexpected disappointment. He'd planned to move on today to continue his journey west. Now, with the Ortiz family's immediate future secured, there was no reason to delay. Yet something held him back. His gaze drifted to Willow, who was speaking animatedly with Mick about the Wilson ranch. The morning sunlight through the window caught in her dark hair, highlighting strands of auburn he hadn't noticed before. When she turned and caught him watching her, her smile faltered slightly, replaced by a look he couldn't quite read. "Will you be moving on today, Mr. Drake?" She asked, her question echoing his thoughts. Before he could answer, Mrs. Henshaw chimed in. "I heard Whitaker at the Mercantile is looking for help. His assistant joined up with the Army last week." "I'm not much for store work," Rosston admitted. "Well, Wilson mentioned needing an experienced horseman to help break some new stock," Mick offered. Said his regular wrangler broke his leg last month. Could be a few weeks' work if you're interested. Rosston hesitated. He'd never stayed in one place for long, not since leaving Illinois years ago. The open road had been his only constant companion. Yet now, faced with the prospect of riding out of Fort Kearny, of never seeing Willow Pruitt again, he found himself reconsidering. "I might stick around a while," he said finally, meeting Willow's gaze. "If Mr. Wilson's hiring." The smile that bloomed on her face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie, and Rosston knew in that moment that his westward journey would have to wait. Within the hour, they were loaded into Mick's wagon and heading out of town toward the Wilson Ranch. As they passed the main street, Rosston noticed Caldwell watching from the doorway of the bank, his expression thunderous. Sheriff Dobbs stood beside him, hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "Caldwell doesn't look too pleased," Rosston remarked quietly to Mick. The livery owner shrugged. "He's used to getting his way, but even he knows he can't push too far. Fort Kearny may be small, but most folks here still have a sense of right and wrong. What he tried last night crossed a line." Rosston nodded, though he kept his eyes on the two men until they were well out of sight. Something told him Caldwell wasn't a man who forgot a slight, and being publicly challenged had clearly wounded his pride. The Wilson Ranch lay about 5 miles northeast of Fort Kearny, a modest spread of several hundred acres with a small herd of cattle and a budding horse breeding operation. Elijah Wilson, a grizzled veteran of the Mexican War with a shock of white hair and hands gnarled by arthritis and hard work, greeted them at the main house. "Mick tells me you folks know ranching," he said, eyeing the Ortiz family appraisingly. "Yes, sir," Manuel replied respectfully. "I worked cattle in Texas before coming north and the Pruitt farm for 5 years after." Wilson nodded. "And you?" he asked Rosston. "I've broken horses from Missouri to Colorado Territory," Rosston answered. "Worked cattle drives to Kansas City and Abilene." Wilson studied him for a long moment before nodding again. "Got 4 Mustangs need breaking. Pays $3 a head plus room and board while you're here. Ortiz family gets the foreman's cabin, $15 a month for the lot of you plus meals. That suit you?" The terms were fair, better than many would offer, and they all agreed quickly. Wilson showed them to their accommodations, the cabin for the Ortiz family and a small room above the stable for Rosston, and outlined their duties. As the days stretched into weeks, they settled into a routine. Manuel proved his worth quickly, his knowledge of cattle impressing even the skeptical ranch hands. Carlos, strong and eager to learn, worked tirelessly from dawn till dusk, and Willow, in addition to helping Mrs. Wilson with household tasks, revealed a natural affinity with horses that surprised everyone, including Rosston. He discovered this one afternoon while working with a particularly stubborn Mustang, a spirited black mare with a white blaze who refused to accept a saddle. After several frustrating hours, he took a break, wiping sweat from his brow as he leaned against the corral fence. "She's afraid," came Willow's voice behind him. She had approached quietly, carrying a bucket of water. Rosston accepted a ladle gratefully. "Seems more angry than afraid to me." Willow shook her head. "Look at her eyes when you approach with the saddle. That's fear, not anger." Rosston studied the Mustang with fresh eyes and realized Willow was right. "What would you suggest, may I?" she asked, gesturing to the corral gate. Surprised but curious, Rosston nodded. Willow slipped into the corral, moving slowly, deliberately. The mare watched her warily but didn't bolt as she had with Rosston. Willow began speaking softly in Spanish, her voice melodic and soothing. Gradually, she approached the horse, hand extended but not reaching. To Rosston's amazement, the Mustang eventually stretched her neck forward, nostrils flaring as she caught Willow's scent. After several minutes of this careful dance, Willow was able to stroke the mare's neck gently. "My grandfather raised horses in Mexico," she explained, not taking her eyes off the Mustang. "He taught me that they can sense our intentions. If we approach with patience and respect, they will meet us halfway." Over the next hour, Willow demonstrated this philosophy, gradually introducing the mare to the saddle blanket, then the saddle itself. By sunset, While the horse wasn't ready to be ridden, she had accepted the saddle without panicking more progress than Rosston had made all day. "That was impressive," he told her as they walked back to the ranch house for supper. "Where did you learn to handle horses like that?" Willow smiled, the setting sun casting her face in a golden glow. "My mother's people were Comanche. She was captured as a child raised by a white family. But she remembered some things, including their way with horses. She passed what she knew to me before she died." "I'm sorry about your mother," Rosston said softly. Willow nodded, her expression momentarily sad. "I was 12. She caught fever one winter. But she lived long enough to see us settle with the Pruitts to know we would be safe." She glanced at him. "Or so we thought." The reminder of what she'd endured at Caldwell's hands hung in the air between them. Without thinking, Rosston reached out and touched her arm gently. "You're safe now." She looked at his hand on her arm, then up to his face. Something passed between them in that moment, something neither was quite ready to name, but both felt deeply. "Thanks to you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Rosston could respond, Carlos called to them from the ranch house porch, breaking the spell of the moment. But as they walked the remaining distance in silence, Rosston was acutely aware of Willow's presence beside him and of the strange new feeling taking root in his heart. That evening, as they gathered around the Wilsons' table for supper, Elijah Wilson made an announcement. "Got word from town today. Army's looking for horses, buying for the cavalry." The news sent a ripple of interest around the table. The war, while distant from Nebraska Territory, still affected their lives in countless ways. "They're paying good money," Wilson continued. "Thought we might drive some of our stock to Fort Kearny next week. That includes those Mustangs, Drake, if you can get them saddle ready." Rosston nodded. "The black mare's coming along. With Willow's help, I think we can have her ready." Wilson raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Good, we'll take 10 head altogether. Should fetch a tidy sum." As they discussed the details of the horse sale, Rosston couldn't help but notice how naturally Willow had been included in the conversation. The Wilsons had accepted the Ortiz family without prejudice, treating them as valued members of the ranch household. It was a stark contrast to the treatment they'd received from Caldwell and much of Fort Kearny. Later that night, unable to sleep in the summer heat, Rosston stepped outside the stable to catch the evening breeze. He was surprised to see a figure sitting on the porch of the foreman's cabin. Willow, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, gazing up at the star-filled sky. He hesitated, unsure whether to approach or leave her to her solitude. But something drew him to her, a pull he couldn't explain and didn't try to resist. As he drew near, she turned, apparently unsurprised by his presence. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly, sitting beside her on the porch steps but keeping a respectful distance. She shook her head. "I often sit outside at night. The stars remind me that there's more to the world than our troubles." Rosston looked up at the vast canopy of stars. "My father used to say that stars are windows into heaven where angels watch over us." "You believe that?" she asked, studying his profile. He considered the question. "I don't know about angels, but I'd like to think there's more to life than what we can see and touch." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the occasional soft nickering of horses in the nearby corral. "Mr. Wilson says you're a drifter," Willow said finally, "that you never stay in one place long." Rosston nodded. "That's been true enough." "Why?" The simple question caught him off guard. He'd never really examined his restlessness before. It was just part of who he was or who he'd become. "After my parents died, there wasn't much to keep me in Illinois. I headed west looking for something." "Did you find it?" He turned to look at her, struck by how the moonlight softened her features, making her appear almost ethereal. "I'm not sure I even knew what I was looking for. And now." Her eyes searched his as if trying to read the answer there before he spoke it. The question hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "Now," he said slowly, "I'm not in such a hurry to move on." The admission surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. A small smile curved her lips, and Rosston felt an overwhelming urge to lean closer, to discover if those lips were as soft as they appeared. But the moment was interrupted by the sound of the cabin door opening. Manuel stepped onto the porch, concern etched on his face. "Willow. Is everything all right?" "Yes, Papa," she answered, rising quickly. "Mr. Drake and I were just talking. I couldn't sleep." Manuel nodded, though his expression remained watchful as he glanced between them. "It's late, my hija. You should rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day." "Of course," she agreed. She turned to Rosston. "Good night, Mr. Drake." "Good night, Miss Pruitt," he replied formally, aware of Manuel's protective gaze. As Willow disappeared into the cabin, Manuel lingered, his eyes fixed on Rosston. "My daughter has suffered enough, Mr. Drake." "I mean her no harm, sir," Rosston assured him, understanding the father's concern. Manuel studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I believe you, but be careful with her heart. Willow feels things deeply." With that cryptic warning, he returned inside, leaving Rosston alone with his thoughts and the vast, star-strewn sky above. The following days were filled with hard work as they prepared the horses for the army buyers. Rosston and Willow worked together with the black mare, whom Willow had named Estrella for the white star-shaped blaze on her forehead. Under their combined patience and skill, Estrella progressed rapidly, eventually accepting not only the saddle but also a rider. The first time Willow mounted the mare successfully, her face lit up with such joy that Rosston couldn't help but laugh along with her as she guided Estrella in a gentle circuit around the corral. "You're a natural," he called as she passed him. "She trusts you completely." Willow beamed at the praise, her cheeks flushed with excitement. When she finally dismounted, her eyes were bright with accomplishment. "She just needed to know we weren't going to hurt her." "You have a gift," Rosston told her sincerely. "I've known veteran horsemen who couldn't have done what you did with her." Willow ducked her head, unaccustomed to such praise. "My mother would be proud. She always said horses could heal a wounded spirit." "Your mother was a wise woman," Rosston said softly. Willow looked up at him, her expression suddenly vulnerable. "Sometimes I worry I'm forgetting her. It's been so long." Without thinking, Rosston reached out and took her hand. "You honor her memory every day through your actions, your kindness." She didn't pull away, instead squeezing his hand gently. "Thank you for understanding." The connection between them had grown stronger with each passing day, a delicate thread weaving their lives together in ways neither had anticipated. Rosston found himself sharing stories of his childhood in Illinois, of his parents and their work on the Underground Railroad. Willow, in turn, spoke of her mother's Comanche heritage, of the stories and skills that had been passed down to her. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Carlos watched them with a mixture of curiosity and brotherly concern, while Manuel's gaze remained vigilant but not unkind. Even Mrs. Wilson observed their budding relationship with a knowing smile, occasionally finding ways to assign them tasks together. The day before they were to drive the horses to Fort Kearney, Elijah Wilson called Rosston aside after supper. "You've done good work here, Drake," the older man said, leaning heavily on his cane as they stood outside the barn. "Got to thinking you might want to stay on after the Army sale. Could use a man with your skills year-round." The offer caught Rosston by surprise. "That's generous of you, Mr. Wilson." "Not generosity," Wilson grunted. "Good business. You've got a way with horses that reminds me of myself when I was younger, before these hands gave out." He flexed his gnarled fingers ruefully. Rosston was silent for a moment, considering. A permanent position would mean putting down roots, something he hadn't done in years, but the thought held an appeal it never had before. "Think about it," Wilson said, clapping him on the shoulder. "No need to decide right away, but the offer's there." As Wilson limped back toward the main house, Rosston remained by the barn, turning the proposition over in his mind. A steady job, a place to belong, these were things he deliberately avoided since leaving Illinois, preferring the freedom of the open trail and the absence of attachments. But now, the idea of staying, of building something lasting, didn't seem like a constraint but a possibility. And he knew, with a clarity that both thrilled and terrified him, that Willow Pruitt was at the heart of that change. Lost in thought, he didn't hear her approach until she spoke. "You look troubled." He turned to find her standing a few feet away, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. Not troubled, he corrected with a small smile. Just thinking. About what? She asked, coming to stand beside him. The future, he admitted. Wilson offered me a permanent position here. Her eyes widened slightly. Will you accept? The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Rosston studied her face in the fading light, searching for some sign of what she hoped his answer would be. I'm considering it, he said finally. What do you think I should do? A small smile played at her lips. I think you should follow your heart, Rosston Drake. It was the first time she'd used his first name, and the sound of it on her lips sent a warm current through him. And if my heart has been leading me in circles all these years, then perhaps it's time to listen more carefully, she suggested, her voice soft but steady. They stood close enough that he could catch the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair, a luxury misses. Wilson had gifted her from her own garden. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Willow. He began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say, but knowing he needed to say something. She waited, her dark eyes fixed on his face, patient yet expectant. Before he could continue, the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the quiet evening. They turned to see one of Wilson's ranch hands, Tom Jenkins, riding hard toward the main house, his horse lathered with exertion. Trouble, Jenkins called as he reined in. Riders coming, armed. Wilson emerged from the house, rifle in hand. How many? 6, maybe 7, Jenkins reported breathlessly. Caldwell's leading them. A cold knot formed in Rosston's stomach. He'd known Caldwell wouldn't let things lie, but he hadn't expected a direct confrontation like this. Get inside, he told Willow urgently. Find your father and brother. Her eyes widened with fear, but she nodded and ran toward the foreman's cabin. Rosston hurried to the bunkhouse, where his saddlebags contained his Colt revolver and a Winchester rifle he rarely used but kept well maintained. By the time Caldwell's group reached the ranch yard, Wilson had assembled his men's 6 ranch hands, plus Rosston, Manuel, and Carlos. They stood in a loose semicircle before the main house, weapons visible but not yet raised. Caldwell reined in his horse, his face flushed with either exertion or anger, possibly both. Sheriff Dobbs rode at his right hand, looking uncomfortable but determined. The other riders were men Rosston recognized from town, likely hired guns or businessmen who owed Caldwell favors. Wilson, Caldwell called, nodding curtly, this doesn't concern you. You're on my land, Caldwell, Wilson replied coldly. That makes it my concern. Caldwell's gaze swept past Wilson to fix on Rosston. I've come for what's mine. The Ortiz family has an outstanding debt. That debt was paid in full, Rosston stated, stepping forward. You accepted the money yourself. Under duress, Caldwell countered, with a gun to my head. That's a lie, Rosston said evenly. There were 40 witnesses who saw me pay you fairly. Sheriff Dobbs shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Caldwell's filed a complaint, says the payment was coerced. I've got a warrant to bring in the Ortiz family for questioning. Questioning? Manuel spoke up, his dignity undiminished despite the danger. Or return to slavery. You were never slaves, Caldwell snapped. You were contract workers who attempted to flee without fulfilling your obligations. The only obligation here, Wilson interjected, is to the law, and the law says human beings can't be bought and sold. I've got the law right here, Dobbs said, patting his badge significantly. Now we can do this peaceful like or what, Sheriff? Rosston interrupted. You'll shoot unarmed people on private property. Is that how the law works in Fort Kearney? A tense silence fell over the gathering. The ranch hands had moved subtly closer together, creating a more unified front. Caldwell's men, sensing the shift, began to look nervous. I don't want bloodshed, Dobbs said, looking increasingly uncomfortable. But I've got a duty, your duty, came a new voice, is to uphold the law, not bend it for Lawrence Caldwell. All eyes turned to see Judge Samuel Hammond riding into the yard, accompanied by Mick from the livery and 2 other men from town. The judge, a stern-faced man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness, dismounted with the stiff dignity of his office. Judge Hammond, Dobbs stammered. I didn't expect, clearly, the judge cut him off. Mr. Mitchell here, he gestured to Mick, was concerned enough about tonight's proceedings to ride all the way to my homestead. I'm grateful he did. This is a local matter, Judge, Caldwell began, but Hammond silenced him with a raised hand. I've reviewed the so-called contract between the Ortiz family and Thomas Pruitt, the judge stated. It's an employment agreement, not an indenture. And even if it were, Mr. Caldwell, you'd have no legal right to transfer it to yourself upon foreclosing on the Pruitt property. Caldwell's face darkened. The law, I am well aware of the law, sir, Hammond interrupted sharply, as should be our sheriff. He fixed Dobbs with a severe look that made the lawman wince. The Emancipation Proclamation aside, Nebraska Territory has never recognized forced servitude of any kind. The payment Mr. Drake made, which you accepted, settled any legitimate financial claim you might have had. Dobbs looked desperately between Caldwell and the judge, clearly torn between loyalty and duty. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he folded the warrant and pocketed it. Seems there's been a misunderstanding, he muttered. Caldwell's expression was thunderous. This isn't over, he snarled, his gaze fixed on Rosston. Yes, Mr. Caldwell, it is, Judge Hammond stated firmly, unless you wish to face charges of attempted kidnapping and false imprisonment. In which case, I'll be happy to hear the case personally. For a long moment, it seemed Caldwell might defy even the judge, but finally, with a curt nod, he wheeled his horse around. Come on, boys, we're done here. As they rode away, the tension in the yard gradually dissipated. Judge Hammond approached Rosston, offering his hand. Mr. Drake, I presume I've heard a great deal about you. Judge, Rosston nodded respectfully as they shook hands. I appreciate your timely arrival. Thank Mr. Mitchell, Hammond replied, gesturing to Mick. He overheard Caldwell's plans at the saloon and acted quickly. Mick shrugged modestly. Fort Kearny's got its share of problems, but most folks don't hold with what Caldwell was trying to do. When I heard him boasting about coming out here with Dobbs, I knew there'd be trouble. As the men discussed what had transpired, Rosston became aware of movement at the foreman's cabin. Willow stood on the porch, her face etched with concern. When their eyes met across the yard, relief washed over her features. Without hesitation, she hurried toward him. Is it over? She asked as she reached the group, her voice steady despite the fear she must have felt. It's over, Rosston assured her, resisting the urge to take her hand in front of so many witnesses. Judge Hammond has made it clear that Caldwell has no claim on you or your family. Willow turned to the judge, curtsying respectfully. Thank you, Your Honor, we are in your debt. Hammond's stern countenance softened slightly. No debt, young lady, just seeing justice done. He turned to Wilson. I'll be staying in town for a few days. If there's any further trouble, send word immediately. As the judge and his companions prepared to depart, Willow moved closer to Rosston. In the fading twilight, with the immediate danger past, the moment they had shared before the interruption seemed to resurface between them. You were saying something earlier, she reminded him softly, before we were interrupted. Rosston looked down at her, struck anew by her courage and grace under pressure. The words he'd been searching for earlier now came to him with perfect clarity. I was going to say, he began, his voice low enough that only she could hear, that I think my heart has finally found its true direction. The smile that bloomed on her face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie, full of promise and new beginnings. And in that moment, Rosston Drake the drifter, the restless soul, felt something inside him settle into place, as if he'd finally found the home he hadn't known he was seeking. The following morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect day for the drive to Fort Kearny. The confrontation with Caldwell had cast a shadow over the ranch, but with Judge Hammond's intervention, a cautious optimism prevailed. The army buyers would be in town for only 2 days, and Wilson was determined not to miss the opportunity. We'll take the horses in as planned, he announced at breakfast. Drake, you and Carlos handle the Mustangs. Manuel, you'll come with me to negotiate. The rest of you keep the place running smooth while we're gone. Rosston nodded, though he couldn't help feeling uneasy about returning to Fort Kearny so soon after the confrontation. Willow caught his eye across the table, her expression mirroring his concern. What about Caldwell? she asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Wilson's weathered face hardened. Judge Hammond's still in town. Caldwell won't try anything with him around. Besides, we'll be dealing directly with the Army. Even Caldwell's not fool enough to interfere with military business. The logic was sound, but Rosston remained wary. He'd seen too much of the world's darkness to believe that legal threats alone would deter a man like Lawrence Caldwell, whose pride had been publicly wounded. As they prepared for the drive, selecting the 10 best horses, including Estrella, Willow approached Rosston by the corral. She wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Wilson had given her, with her dark hair braided and pinned up a far cry from the frightened young woman he'd first seen at the auction block. "I wish I could go with you," she said, reaching out to stroke Estrella's nose. The mare nickered softly, recognizing her touch. "Your father and brother will be there," Rosston assured her, "and Wilson knows what he's doing." "It's not them I'm worried about," she replied, looking up at him with those dark, expressive eyes that seemed to see right through him. Rosston's heart quickened at the concern in her voice, concern for him. "I can handle Caldwell," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Willow stepped closer, her hand moving from the horse to rest lightly on his arm. "Be careful, Rosston, please." The simple touch and the soft plea in her voice stirred something deep within him. Before he could reconsider, he leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief but filled with unspoken promise, a silent vow that he would return to her. When he pulled back, Willow's eyes were wide with surprise, but the smile that followed was radiant. "I'll hold you to that," she whispered. Carlos's discreet cough from nearby reminded them they weren't alone. Willow stepped back, blushing slightly, while Rosston turned to find her brother watching them with a mixture of amusement and brotherly concern. "The horses are ready," Carlos announced, his tone neutral though his eyes held a clear warning. "Be worthy of my sister's heart." Rosston nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "Let's get moving, then." The drive to Fort Kearny went smoothly, with the Mustangs following the lead horses without incident. Estrella, in particular, seemed to have shed her initial wildness entirely, responding to commands with an intelligence that impressed even Wilson. "That mare's special," the rancher commented as they approached the outskirts of town. "Army'll pay top dollar for her." Rosston nodded, though the thought of Estrella being sold to the cavalry brought an unexpected pang. He knew Willow had grown attached to the horse, and truthfully, so had he. But business was business, and Wilson needed the money from the sale. Fort Kearny was bustling with activity when they arrived. The Army buyers had set up near the livery, where a temporary corral had been constructed to hold the purchased horses. Already, several animals from other ranches stood within, being examined by uniformed soldiers. Captain James Fletcher, a stern-faced man with a precise mustache, greeted Wilson with a brisk handshake. "Mr. Wilson, heard you might have some stock for us." 10 head, Captain," Wilson confirmed. "Best horses in Nebraska Territory." Fletcher nodded non-committally. "We'll see." Army has standards. As they led the horses into the inspection area, Rosston noticed Caldwell watching from across the street, standing in the doorway of the bank. Their eyes met briefly, and the hatred in Caldwell's gaze was palpable. But he made no move to approach, not with Army personnel and Judge Hammond's authority present. The inspection proceeded methodically. Captain Fletcher and his sergeant examined each horse thoroughly, checking teeth, hooves, and conformation. Wilson, with Manuel's occasional input, answered questions about each animal's training and temperament. When they reached Estrella, Fletcher's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Fine-looking mare," he commented, running a practiced hand down her sleek neck. "Unusual coloring." "She's special," Rosston agreed. "Smart as a whip and gentle when treated right." Fletcher nodded appreciatively. "What are you asking for her?" Wilson named a price that made the captain's eyebrows rise, but after putting Estrella through her paces with Rosston in the saddle demonstrating her responsiveness, Fletcher agreed without further haggling. "She'll make a fine officer's mount," the captain said as they concluded the deal. "Probably assign her to Lieutenant Wallace. He's got a good hand with spirited horses." As Wilson and the captain finalized the paperwork for all 10 horses, Rosston found himself standing beside Estrella, stroking her mane thoughtfully. The thought of never seeing the mare again, of telling Willow she had been sold, sat heavily in his chest. "Something on your mind, Drake?" Wilson asked as he approached, pocketing the Army's payment. Rosston hesitated, then decided directness was best. "Estrella, the black mare. Willow's grown attached to her, I was wondering." Wilson studied him for a moment, then surprised him with a knowing smile. "Wondering if you could buy her back for Willow, as a gift, perhaps," Rosston nodded, feeling uncharacteristically transparent. Wilson glanced at Captain Fletcher, who was now overseeing the branding of their newly purchased horses with the Army's mark. "Might be too late for that. Army's paid good money." Rosston reached into his vest pocket, pulling out the small leather pouch that contained his savings. "I've got $200. It's more than Fletcher paid for her." Wilson's eyebrows rose. "That's a lot of money for a courting gift, son." "It's not just a gift," Rosston replied quietly. "It's a promise." Understanding dawned in Wilson's eyes. "A promise, eh? Well, in that case." He turned and called to Fletcher. "Captain, got a moment?" After a brief, hushed conversation that involved several glances in Rosston's direction, Fletcher sighed and nodded reluctantly. "Normally, I wouldn't consider it, but since you've provided such fine stock otherwise, very well." Relief washed over Rosston as he counted out the money, nearly everything he had saved over the past few years. But as he watched Estrella being led back from the Army corral, he knew it was worth every cent. "You're a fool for love, Drake," Wilson said, though there was no judgment in his tone. "But I respect a man who knows his own mind." With their business concluded, they prepared to return to the ranch. Carlos led Estrella, who seemed almost smug about her reprieve from military service. Manuel and Wilson rode ahead, discussing the successful sale while Rosston brought up the rear. As they passed the bank, Rosston noticed Caldwell was no longer in the doorway. The realization made him uneasy, but he brushed it aside, focusing instead on thoughts of Willow's reaction when she saw Estrella returning with them. They were nearly out of town when Sheriff Dobbs stepped into the street, hand raised to stop them. "Hold up there, Wilson." The rancher reined in, frowning. "What is it, Sheriff? We've concluded our business." "Not quite all of it," Dobbs replied, his expression uncomfortable but determined. "Got a complaint about a stolen horse." "Stolen?" Wilson echoed incredulously. "Every horse we brought to town was bred on my ranch." "Not according to Lawrence Caldwell," Dobbs said, producing a piece of paper. "Says that black mare with the white blaze belongs to him. Says it was taken from the Pruitt place when he foreclosed." Carlos tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the rope at his belt, but Rosston shook his head in warning. Starting a fight with the sheriff would only make things worse. "That's absurd," Rosston stated calmly. Estrella was captured wild in the hills north of the ranch. Wilson's hands broke her initially. "Willow and I finished her training." "Willow," Dobbs raised an eyebrow. "The Mexican girl, Miss Pruitt," Rosston corrected firmly, "is half Comanche and has a natural way with horses." "She named Estrella herself." Dobbs shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm just doing my job. Caldwell's got a bill of sale showing he purchased all livestock from the Pruitt place, says that includes this mare." "The Army just purchased that horse," Wilson pointed out. "Then sold her back to my man here, got the papers to prove it." "That complicates things," Dobbs admitted, scratching his chin. "But Caldwell's mighty insistent." "I imagine he is," came a familiar voice. Judge Hammond approached, his judicial robes replaced by more practical riding clothes, but his air of authority undiminished. "Sheriff Dobbs, are you attempting to enforce a dubious property claim against a horse that was just legally sold by the United States Army?" Dobbs paled slightly. "Just investigating a complaint, Judge. Then investigate it properly," Hammond advised sternly. "Examine Mr. Wilson's breeding records. Interview his ranch hands who captured and initially broke the Mustang. Speak with the Army officers who purchased and then resold the animal. That's how a proper lawman conducts an investigation, not by accosting citizens in the street based on the word of a man with a known grudge." Thoroughly chastened, Dobbs stepped back. "Yes, sir, Judge, I'll look into it more thoroughly." See that you do, Hammond nodded. And Sheriff. Remember that your badge serves the law, not Lawrence Caldwell. It would be a shame if the territorial governor needed to appoint a new sheriff to Fort Kearney. With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, Dobbs mumbled an apology and retreated toward the jailhouse. Judge Hammond turned to Wilson and his men with a wry smile. Gentlemen, I suggest you return to your ranch. I suspect Sheriff Dobbs will be far too busy with proper investigative procedures to bother you further. Much obliged, Judge, Wilson said sincerely. Don't know what this town would do without you riding circuit. Hammond's expression sobered. Neither do I, Mr. Wilson, neither do I. He glanced toward the bank where Caldwell could be seen watching from a second-floor window. Some men mistake wealth for righteousness. It falls to the rest of us to correct that misapprehension. They parted ways with the judge and continued out of town without further incident. As they rode, Rosston found himself repeatedly glancing back, unable to shake the feeling that Caldwell's vendetta was far from over. But with Estrella safely in their possession and the Army's sale legitimizing their ownership, at least one battle had been won. The sun was beginning its descent when they finally reached the Wilson Ranch. Willow was waiting on the porch of the foreman's cabin, rising quickly when she spotted them approaching. Her face lit up with surprise and joy when she saw Estrella among the returning riders. "You didn't sell her," she called, hurrying toward them as they dismounted in the yard. Carlos grinned, handing his sister the mare's lead rope. "Rosston bought her back, for you." Willow's eyes widened as she looked from her brother to Rosston. "For me, but why?" Rosston stepped forward, suddenly aware that Wilson, Manuel, and the other ranch hands were watching with varying degrees of interest and amusement. "Because she's yours," he said simply. "You two understand each other." Tears welled in Willow's eyes as she stroked Estrella's muzzle. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept her," Rosston suggested softly. "And maybe take a ride with me tomorrow." The smile that bloomed on her face was answer enough, but as she stepped closer to thank him properly, Manuel cleared his throat meaningfully. "It seems we have much to discuss, Mr. Drake," he said, though his stern tone was belied by the glint of approval in his eyes. "Yes, sir," Rosston agreed respectfully. "I believe we do." That evening after supper, Rosston sat with Manuel on the porch of the foreman's cabin. The older man packed his pipe thoughtfully before speaking, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. "My daughter tells me you have asked permission to court her," he began. Rosston nodded. "Yes, sir, if you'll allow it." Manuel lit his pipe, the sweet aroma of tobacco filling the evening air. "You are not a man who stays in one place, Mr. Drake. I've been offered a permanent position here," Rosston countered. "Mr. Wilson wants me to oversee his horse breeding operation. And will you accept?" Rosston met the older man's gaze steadily. "Yes, I've already told him I would." Manuel nodded slowly, considering this. "Why?" "Because I love your daughter," Rosston answered without hesitation. "Because when I look at Willow, I see my future." A small smile tugged at Manuel's lips. "You speak plainly, I respect that." He puffed on his pipe for a moment before continuing. "My Willow has her mother's spirit, proud, strong, but also tender-hearted. She deserves a man who will honor all aspects of her nature." "I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of her," Rosston promised. Manuel studied him for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. Finally, he nodded. "Then you have my blessing. But understand this, Mr. Drake, my daughter comes from two worlds, the Mexican and the Comanche. Both are part of who she is. Can you accept that?" "In a world that often looks down on those who are different, sir," Rosston replied earnestly, "it's precisely who she is that I've fallen in love with. I don't see Willow as half of anything. I see her as whole, complete, and more remarkable than anyone I've ever known." Manuel's expression softened, and he reached out to clasp Rosston's shoulder. "Then welcome to our family, son. May you bring each other joy." Inside the cabin, Willow had been listening anxiously through the partially open door. When she heard her father's blessing, she couldn't contain her happiness any longer. She pushed the door open fully, her face alight with joy. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered, embracing Manuel tightly. The older man chuckled, returning her embrace before gently pushing her toward Rosston. Go on then, young love should not be kept waiting. As Manuel tactfully retreated inside, Rosston took Willow's hands in his. In the soft glow of twilight, with the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, he made his heartfelt declaration. Willow Pruitt, from the moment I saw you at that auction, something in me changed. I've spent years drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But now I know why I was looking for you, even before I knew you existed. Tears of happiness spilled down Willow's cheeks as she squeezed his hands. And I was waiting for you, even when I had lost all hope. Rosston drew her closer, his arms encircling her waist. I promise you, Willow, that as long as I live, you will never again be treated as less than the extraordinary woman you are. No one will ever again try to sell what cannot be bought: your freedom, your dignity, your heart. My heart is already yours, she whispered, rising on tiptoe to meet his lips with hers. Their kiss, tender yet passionate, sealed a promise that had begun that fateful evening in Fort Kearny, a promise of love, respect, and a future built together on the foundation of one man's refusal to let injustice stand. The months that followed brought many changes to the Wilson Ranch. Rosston threw himself into his new role, overseeing the horse breeding operation, applying the same dedication and skill that had marked his years as a drifter to building something permanent. Under his guidance, the ranch's reputation for quality horses spread throughout Nebraska Territory and beyond. Willow flourished as well, her natural ability with horses complementing Rosston's more technical knowledge. Together, they developed training methods that combined her intuitive approach with his practical experience, creating a program that produced mounts prized for both their spirit and their reliability. Their courtship proceeded with a proper blend of passion and restraint. Rosston and Willow spent their days working side by side, stealing moments of privacy when they could. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch of the foreman's cabin, talking for hours about their pasts, their dreams, and the future they hoped to build together. Manuel watched their growing love with quiet approval, while Carlos gradually shifted from protective brother to supportive friend. The Wilson family, too, embraced the couple, with Mrs. Wilson taking a particular interest in Willow's happiness, treating her almost as a daughter. Fort Kearny, however, remained a source of tension. Lawrence Caldwell's influence in town had been somewhat diminished by Judge Hammond's intervention, but the banker's resentment festered. Sheriff Dobbs, chastened by the judge's rebuke, maintained an uneasy neutrality, neither harassing the Ortiz family nor standing against Caldwell's less overt machinations. Judge Hammond himself returned to his circuit duties after ensuring that Caldwell understood the legal boundaries he could not cross. Before leaving, he had a final conversation with Rosston. "Mr. Drake," the judge said as they stood outside the Fort Kearny courthouse, "I admire what you did for the Ortiz family. Not many men would have taken such a stand." "I just did what was right," Rosston replied modestly. Hammond nodded. "Yes, and that's rarer than it should be. But I feel I should warn you, Lawrence Caldwell is not a man who forgives easily. He's lost face in this community because of your actions, and men like him find ways to retaliate." "I'll keep that in mind," Rosston assured him, "but we're staying at Wilson's ranch well outside his influence." "For now," Hammond agreed, "but be vigilant, and if you should need legal assistance in the future for any reason, this might help." He handed Rosston a sealed letter. "My endorsement for you to read law should you ever have an interest. The territory needs more men with your sense of justice." Rosston accepted the letter with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you, Judge. I've never considered such a path, but I'm honored by your confidence." "Consider it," Hammond urged. "A man with a family to protect would do well to have the law as an ally, not just a distant ideal." The judge's words stayed with Rosston long after their meeting. The idea of studying law, of perhaps one day standing against men like Caldwell with more than just moral conviction, held a certain appeal. He discussed it with Willow during one of their evening talks. "Do you think I could do it?" he asked as they sat beneath a blanket of stars, Willow's head resting on his shoulder. "Become a lawyer, maybe even a judge someday? I think you can do anything you set your mind to," she replied without hesitation. "You have a strong sense of right and wrong and the courage to stand by your convictions. Isn't that what the law should be about?" Her faith in him was humbling and inspiring. "It would mean some time away," he pointed out. "I'd need to study with an established lawyer, take examinations." Willow sat up, her expression serious in the moonlight. "If it's something you truly want, we'll make it work. Whatever path you choose, Rosston, I'll walk it with you." The sincerity in her voice, the unwavering support in her eyes, these were gifts he had never expected to find in this life. "I love you, Willow Pruitt," he said softly, drawing her close, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she whispered against his lips, "my cowboy who refused to let me be sold like cattle." As summer gave way to autumn and autumn to winter, life on the Wilson Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The horse breeding operation thrived, with several foals expected in the spring. Manuel took over management of Wilson's small cattle herd, his experience proving invaluable during the harsh Nebraska winter. Carlos, under Rosston's guidance, developed into a skilled horse trainer in his own right. Throughout these months, Rosston saved every penny he could, supplementing his regular wages with extra work breaking horses for neighboring ranches. By Christmas, he had enough to purchase a small gold ring with a modest diamond, simple but elegant, like the woman he intended it for. He proposed on Christmas Eve as they stood beside Estrella's stall in the warm, hay-scented stable. The mare seemed to approve, nickering softly as Willow tearfully accepted the ring and Rosston's promise of forever. They planned a spring wedding when the prairie would be in bloom and travel easier for the few guests they wished to invite. Judge Hammond agreed to perform the ceremony, adding legitimacy to their union that would be recognized throughout the territory. Winter passed slowly, as winters do on the frontier, full of hard work, early nights, and the close companionship of those who become family by choice as much as by blood. Rosston began reading law books borrowed from Judge Hammond, studying by lamplight after long days of physical labor. Willow often joined him, her quick mind grasping legal concepts with surprising ease. "Maybe you should be the lawyer," he teased one evening as she correctly identified a flaw in a contract they were reviewing. She laughed, the sound warming the small room more effectively than the crackling fire. "I think one lawyer in the family will be enough. Besides, I have other dreams." "Tell me," he encouraged, setting aside the heavy tome. Willow's expression grew thoughtful. "I want to create a place where children of all backgrounds can learn together. A school that honors both book learning and practical skills, where being half Mexican or half Comanche or any other mixture isn't seen as a disadvantage but a gift." The passion in her voice as she outlined her vision touched Rosston deeply. Here was yet another facet of the remarkable woman he loved, her desire not just to overcome prejudice herself, but to build a better world for those who would come after her. "We'll make it happen," he promised, taking her hands in his. "Together." As winter reluctantly loosened its grip on the land, preparations for their wedding intensified. Mrs. Wilson and several women from neighboring ranches helped Willow create a simple but beautiful white dress. Elijah Wilson offered to host the ceremony and subsequent celebration at the main ranch house, an honor that touched both Rosston and Willow deeply. Invitations were sent to the few people they wished to share their special day with. Mick from the livery, who had become a trusted friend. Several of Wilson's ranch hands who had stood with them against Caldwell, and a cousin of Manuel's who lived in Kansas City. Judge Hammond, of course, would officiate. The week before the wedding, Rosston rode into Fort Kearny to collect the judge, who was due to arrive on the eastbound stage. The town had changed little since his confrontation with Caldwell months earlier, though there were subtle differences. The banker's influence seemed diminished, with fewer people deferring to him as he moved through town. Sheriff Dobbs, too, appeared to have found some independence, nodding respectfully to Rosston as they passed on the street. As Rosston waited outside the stage depot, he became aware of being watched. Turning, he spotted Caldwell standing in the doorway of his bank, his gaze cold and calculating. The man made no move to approach, but the hatred in his eyes was unmistakable. "Still holding a grudge, I see," came Mick's voice as the livery owner approached. "Man can't stand being shown up, especially by an outsider." "Has he been causing trouble?" Rosston asked, concerned. Mick shrugged. "Not openly. But there's talk he's been buying up debts owed by smaller ranchers, pushing for immediate payment. Some folks think he's trying to expand his holdings outside town." The news was troubling, though not immediately threatening to Wilson's ranch, which was debt-free. Still, Rosston made a mental note to discuss it with the judge when he arrived. The stage was late, delayed by spring mud on the eastern route. As dusk approached, Mick invited Rosston to wait at the livery. "No sense standing in the cold. Come have some coffee. Stage'll get here when it gets here." Grateful for the offer, Rosston followed Mick to the small but comfortable room adjoining the livery where the owner lived. They were midway through their second cup of coffee when the sound of gunfire erupted from the street. Both men rushed outside to find chaos unfolding. The delayed stage had finally arrived, only to be met by 3 masked riders who had opened fire on the driver and guard. The driver was slumped over, clearly wounded, while the guard returned fire from his position atop the coach. Without hesitation, Rosston drew his Colt and fired at the nearest attacker, striking the man in the shoulder. The would-be robber toppled from his horse with a cry of pain, while his companions wheeled their mounts to flee. Sheriff Dobbs arrived moments later, revolver in hand. "What happened?" "Stage robbery," Mick explained breathlessly. "Rosston here shot one of them, others got away." Dobbs nodded grimly and moved to check on the fallen robber, who was clutching his shoulder and moaning. The sheriff roughly pulled away the man's mask, revealing a face Rosston didn't recognize, a young man, perhaps in his early 20s. "Who are you working for, boy?" Dobbs demanded. "Nobody," the youth gasped. "Just trying to make some money." "By shooting innocent men?" Rosston asked sharply, helping the wounded stage driver down from his seat. The man's injury appeared superficial, a graze across his upper arm, but he was shaken by the experience. "Wasn't supposed to be no shooting," the captured robber protested. "Just scare them a little, take the strong box." Dobbs scowled in disbelief. 3 armed men against a stage carrying who knows what. You expected no resistance. The young man's eyes darted nervously. "Was told the guard wouldn't fight back, that it was arranged." "Arranged," Dobbs's eyes narrowed. "By whom?" But the robber had apparently said too much already. He clamped his mouth shut, refusing to answer further questions despite Dobbs's increasingly forceful interrogation. Amid the confusion, the stage door opened, and Judge Hammond emerged, looking remarkably composed despite the violence that had greeted his arrival. "It appears I've chosen an exciting time to return to Fort Kearney," he remarked dryly. "Judge," Rosston nodded respectfully. "Are you hurt?" "Merely jostled," Hammond assured him, "though I fear my valise may have suffered more substantial damage." He indicated a bullet hole in his traveling bag. "A hazard of frontier travel, I suppose." As Dobbs escorted the wounded robber to the jail, promising to track down his accomplices, Judge Hammond took Rosston aside. "That was no ordinary robbery attempt," he said quietly. "The boy mentioned it was arranged," Rosston agreed. "Someone told him the guard wouldn't resist." Hammond nodded grimly. "And someone knew I would be on this stage. I received a rather curious letter just before leaving my last circuit stop claiming to be from you, asking me to bring certain legal documents for your wedding. The handwriting was a poor imitation of yours." A chill ran down Rosston's spine. "I sent no such letter." "I suspected as much. That's why I brought no documents with me," the judge replied. "It seems someone wanted to ensure I would be on this particular stage." Rosston's gaze drifted toward the bank, but it was now closed for the evening, Caldwell nowhere to be seen. "You think Caldwell arranged this? To what end?" "Perhaps not to rob the stage at all," Hammond suggested, "but to eliminate a troublesome judge. Or to create an incident that might delay a certain wedding." He raised an eyebrow meaningfully. Revenge can take many forms, Mr. Drake. The implications were disturbing. If Caldwell was indeed behind the attack, he had escalated from petty harassment to potentially deadly violence. And if he was willing to target a territorial judge, how far might he go to strike at Rosston and Willow? We should return to the ranch tonight, Rosston decided. I don't trust leaving you in town. Hammond nodded in agreement. A wise precaution. Though I doubt Mr. Caldwell will try anything further tonight. Too many witnesses, too much attention already drawn. They collected the judge's luggage and borrowed a wagon from Mick, who insisted on accompanying them. Safety in numbers, he declared, retrieving a shotgun from beneath his counter. Besides, I wouldn't miss your wedding for anything. As they departed Fort Kearny under the light of a rising moon, Rosston couldn't shake the feeling that the peaceful life he and Willow had begun to build was suddenly under threat. Caldwell's vendetta, dormant but not forgotten, had taken a dangerous turn. But as the lights of Wilson's ranch appeared in the distance, Rosston's resolve hardened. He had faced danger before, had stood against injustice and prevailed. With Willow by his side, with friends like Mick and allies like Judge Hammond, he would do so again. Whatever Caldwell might attempt, Rosston Drake was no longer a drifter with nothing to lose. He was a man with everything to fight for: a home, a future, and a love that had transformed his life. And fight he would, with every ounce of strength and cunning he possessed, to protect the happiness he had found. Willow was waiting on the porch when they arrived, her face lighting up at the sight of Rosston but quickly clouding with concern as she noted the late hour and the armed escort. "What happened?" she asked as she hurried to meet them. Rosston briefly explained the attempted stage robbery, keeping his voice low to avoid alarming the others in the house. Willow listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "You believe Caldwell is behind this?" she asked when he had finished. "Judge Hammond thinks it's possible," Rosston confirmed. "The timing, the arrangement the robber mentioned, it fits." Willow's eyes flashed with determination. "Then we'll be ready for him. Our wedding is in 3 days. I won't let Lawrence Caldwell ruin that." Her courage in the face of danger only deepened Rosston's admiration for her. "No, we won't," he agreed, taking her hand in his, "but we'll need to be cautious." Judge Hammond approached, having overseen the securing of his luggage. "Miss Pruitt," he greeted her with a respectful nod. "I apologize for the dramatic arrival. Not quite the wedding preparations you had in mind, I imagine." "Any arrival that brings you safely to us is welcome, Judge," Willow replied graciously. "Please come inside. Mrs. Wilson has prepared a late supper for you." As they moved toward the house, Mick took his leave, promising to return for the wedding. "I'll keep my ears open in town," he assured Rosston. "If there's any talk about tonight's incident or any hint of further trouble, you'll be the first to know." The next morning, Rosston gathered Wilson, Manuel, and Carlos to inform them of the previous night's events and his suspicions regarding Caldwell. The men listened gravely, exchanging concerned glances. "If Caldwell's behind this, he's gone too far," Wilson declared, his weathered face set in hard lines. "Attacking a stage carrying a territorial judge, that's federal business. But proving it will be difficult," Manuel pointed out. "The captured robber has not implicated him directly." "And may never do so," Rosston agreed. "If Caldwell is paying for his silence or if the boy genuinely doesn't know who arranged the robbery." Carlos, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "We should postpone the wedding. It's too dangerous." "No," Rosston and Willow said simultaneously. She had entered the room quietly during their discussion and now stood in the doorway, her expression resolute. "We will not let fear dictate our lives," she continued firmly. "Caldwell has already taken too much from my family. He will not take this day from us as well." Wilson nodded slowly, a grudging smile creasing his face. "The girl's got spirit, Drake. Good match for a stubborn mule like yourself." Judge Hammond, who had joined them with his morning coffee, cleared his throat. "I concur with the young lady." Postponing the wedding would signal weakness, something a man like Caldwell would exploit. "However," he added, raising a cautionary finger, "prudence suggests additional security measures." They spent the morning devising protective strategies. Wilson's ranch hands would take shifts keeping watch around the property perimeter. Carlos and Manuel would ensure all firearms were cleaned and loaded, ready for use if needed. Judge Hammond drafted a telegram to the U.S. Marshal's office, describing the stage robbery and requesting an investigation. Rosston insisted that Willow not be left alone, a precaution she accepted with reluctance but understanding. "I feel like a prisoner again," she confessed as they walked toward the stable later that day, Mrs. Wilson accompanying them as chaperone. "Not a prisoner," Rosston corrected gently. "Just precious cargo that needs protecting." She smiled at that, though worry still shadowed her eyes. "Do you truly believe Caldwell would try to harm us on our wedding day?" Rosston considered the question carefully. "I think his pride is wounded, and wounded pride can drive men to desperate acts, but I also believe we've taken every reasonable precaution. And in 3 days, you'll be Mrs. Rosston Drake, and we can begin our life together without shadows from the past." "Mrs. Rosston Drake," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "It sounds right, doesn't it?" "It sounds perfect," he assured her, wishing they weren't under Mrs. Wilson's watchful eye so he could kiss her properly, as if reading his thoughts. Mrs. Wilson tactfully busied herself examining some flower beds several yards away, giving them a moment of relative privacy. Rosston took full advantage, drawing Willow into his arms for a lingering kiss that promised far more once they were husband and wife. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations and heightened vigilance. Guests began to arrive, including Mick and several others from Fort Kearny who were friendly with the Wilson family. The ranch took on a festive atmosphere despite the underlying tension, with bunting and flowers decorating the main house and barn, where the celebration would take place. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring day as if nature itself approved of their union. Rosston, who had spent a restless night in the bunkhouse, rose early and walked the perimeter of the ranch with Wilson's foreman, checking that all was secure. "No sign of trouble," the foreman reported. "Been quiet all night." Rosston nodded, relieved but still wary. "Double the watch today, just to be safe." As he returned to prepare for the ceremony, he spotted Willow slipping into the stable, presumably to visit Estrella. Despite the impropriety of seeing the bride before the wedding, he found himself following her, drawn by an irresistible need to assure himself of her safety. He found her in Estrella's stall, brushing the mare's gleaming coat while speaking to her softly in Spanish. The scene was so peaceful, so perfectly emblematic of Willow's gentle spirit that Rosston hesitated to interrupt, but she sensed his presence, turning with a smile that took his breath away. "It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," she chided gently. "I'll risk it," he replied, moving closer. "You look beautiful," she blushed, glancing down at her simple morning dress. "I'm not even dressed for the ceremony yet." "Doesn't matter," Rosston said truthfully. "You're always beautiful to me." Estrella nickered softly, as if in agreement, making them both laugh. The mare had become a symbol of their relationship, once wild and uncertain, now trusting and devoted. "I wanted to thank her," Willow explained, stroking Estrella's neck. "If not for her, we might not be here today." "True enough," Rosston agreed, thinking of how buying back the mare had cemented his feelings for Willow. "She brought us together in more ways than one." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, sharing this quiet interlude before the day's festivities began. Then reluctantly Rosston stepped back. "I should go. Mrs. Wilson will have my hide if she catches me here." Willow nodded, though her eyes lingered on his face as if memorizing every detail. "I'll see you at the altar." "I'll be the one who can't stop smiling," he promised, backing away before his resolve weakened. The wedding was scheduled for noon, to be followed by a celebration that would last well into the evening. By mid-morning, the ranch was bustling with activity as final preparations were completed, and guests began to assemble. Judge Hammond, resplendent in his judicial robes, took his position before an arch of spring flowers erected in the Wilsons' spacious front parlor. Rosston, wearing a new suit purchased specifically for the occasion, stood nervously at his side, Carlos serving as his best man. The guests, a mix of ranch hands, neighbors, and friends from town, filled the available space, creating an atmosphere of warm anticipation. Elijah Wilson himself would give the bride away, a role he had insisted on when Manuel admitted that his arthritic knees might not allow him to manage the formal procession. As the appointed hour arrived, Mrs. Wilson began playing a hymn on the small organ in the corner, and all eyes turned expectantly toward the doorway. Willow appeared, a vision in white, her dark hair adorned with wildflowers and a simple veil. The dress, modest but elegantly tailored, highlighted her natural grace and beauty. But it was her radiant smile, directed solely at Rosston, that made his heart swell with love and gratitude. Wilson escorted her slowly through the assembled guests, his weathered face softened with paternal pride. When they reached the flower arch, he placed Willow's hand in Rosston's with a gruff but heartfelt, "Take care of her, son." "With my life," Rosston promised, unable to tear his gaze from his bride's luminous face. Judge Hammond began the ceremony with dignified solemnity, his resonant voice filling the room as he spoke of the sacred bonds of matrimony. When the time came for vows, Rosston and Willow had chosen to speak their own words, a decision that had raised some eyebrows but felt right to them both. "Willow," Rosston began, his voice steady despite the emotion welling within him, "when I first saw you, you were in chains of circumstance not of your making. Yet even then, your spirit remained unbroken. Your courage, your compassion, your unwavering strength, these are the qualities that captured my heart. I vow to honor and protect you, to stand beside you in all of life's challenges, and to love you with every breath I take until my last day on this earth." Tears glistened in Willow's eyes as she replied, her voice soft but clear. "Rosston, you came into my life when darkness seemed all-consuming. You not only broke my chains, but showed me a world where I could be valued for who I am, not what others wished me to be. I vow to walk beside you as your equal partner, to share your joys and sorrows, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, and to love you faithfully all the days of our lives." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as they exchanged rings. Willow's, the small diamond Rosston had purchased at Christmas. His, a simple gold band that had once belonged to Manuel's father. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Nebraska," Judge Hammond proclaimed with evident satisfaction, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Rosston needed no further encouragement. He drew Willow into his arms and kissed her with all the love and passion he had stored up over their months of courtship. The guests erupted in cheers and applause, celebrating a union that many had played small but significant roles in bringing about. The celebration that followed was joyous and uninhibited. Tables laden with food and drink were set up in the decorated barn, where fiddlers played lively tunes that soon had everyone dancing. Rosston and Willow moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes from friends and neighbors alike. As afternoon gave way to evening and lanterns were lit throughout the barn, Rosston found himself standing with Judge Hammond, watching as Willow danced with her father. "You've chosen well, Mr. Drake," the judge commented, sipping from a glass of whiskey. "She has a remarkable spirit." "That she does," Rosston agreed, his eyes never leaving his bride. "I'm a fortunate man, indeed." Hammond's expression grew thoughtful. "Have you given any more consideration to reading law? The offer still stands." Rosston nodded slowly. "I have, and I think I'd like to try, not just for myself, but for Willow and the children we hope to have someday. I want to build something lasting, something that stands for the principles we believe in." "A noble aspiration," Hammond approved. "I'll arrange for books to be sent from Omaha. You can study under my guidance when I'm in the area and by correspondence when I'm riding circuit." Their conversation was interrupted by Mick, who approached with a troubled expression. "Hate to disrupt the festivities," he said quietly, "but there's a rider coming fast from town, one of my stable boys." Rosston's hand instinctively moved toward his revolver, which he had left in the house out of respect for the occasion. "Trouble? Don't know yet," Mick admitted, "but the boy wouldn't ride out here unless it was important." The three men stepped outside to meet the approaching rider, who reined in his lathered horse with visible relief at the sight of them. "Mr. Drake," the boy gasped, "Mr. Mick sent me to warn you Caldwell's gathered men. They're riding this way." "How many?" Rosston demanded, all thoughts of celebration vanishing. "6, maybe 7, the boy reported. "Caldwell, Sheriff Dobbs, and some rough types I ain't seen before. They were drinking at the saloon, talking loud about teaching someone a lesson. Then they grabbed their guns and headed this way." Judge Hammond's expression darkened. "Sheriff Dobbs is with them, you're certain?" The boy nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir," looking mighty uncomfortable, but he was riding with them. "How long ago?" Rosston asked. "Half hour, maybe," the stable boy estimated. "I took a shortcut through Miller's Creek to get ahead of them." "Thank you," Rosston said grimly, pressing a coin into the boy's hand. "You've done well." He turned to Mick and Hammond. "We need to prepare, get the women and children into the house. Any man who can handle a weapon should be ready." As they moved to implement these precautions, Willow appeared in the barn doorway, her joy from moments before replaced by concern. "What's happening?" Rosston hesitated, reluctant to burden her with this threat on what should have been the happiest day of their lives. But they had promised honesty to each other, and he wouldn't start their marriage with deception. "Caldwell's coming," he told her simply, "with armed men." Rather than fear, determination flashed in Willow's eyes. "Then we'll be ready for him. This is our day, Rosston, our beginning. I won't let him taint it with violence." Her strength in that moment, her refusal to be cowed by Caldwell's intimidation, reinforced everything Rosston loved about her. "We'll face him together," he promised, taking her hand in his. As they prepared for the approaching confrontation, a peculiar calm settled over the ranch. The celebrations paused but didn't end entirely. The music continued, though softer, and many guests remained in the barn, refusing to let the threat disrupt the wedding entirely. Wilson positioned his ranch hands strategically around the property, while Manuel and Carlos ensured that Judge Hammond was securely protected in the main house. Rosston retrieved his revolver and rifle, checking both carefully before taking up position on the porch, where he would have a clear view of the approaching riders. Willow, against his protests, remained beside him, having changed from her wedding dress into more practical attire, but still wearing the flower crown that marked her as a bride. "My place is with my husband," she said simply when he suggested she seek safety inside. The sun was setting when they heard the approaching hoofbeats. Caldwell's party appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the darkening sky. As they drew closer, Rosston could make out Caldwell himself in the lead, his face set in lines of grim purpose. Sheriff Dobbs rode beside him, looking increasingly uneasy as they approached the clearly prepared defenders. The riders halted just beyond the ranch yard. For a long moment, no one spoke, the tension stretching between the two groups like a taut wire. Finally, Caldwell broke the silence. "Drake," he called, his voice carrying across the open space. "I've come to settle accounts." "There are no accounts to settle, Caldwell," Rosston replied evenly. "Just a man who can't accept that his money doesn't give him the right to own other human beings." Caldwell's face darkened with anger. "You humiliated me, turned the town against me. That debt won't be paid with money." "Then what do you want?" Rosston demanded, though he already knew the answer. "Justice," Caldwell spat, "an eye for an eye." Before Rosston could respond, Judge Hammond emerged from the house, his judicial robes replaced by practical riding clothes, but his authority undiminished. "Is that what you call justice, Mr. Caldwell? Disrupting a wedding celebration with armed men, intimidating innocent people? Persecuting a family whose only crime was being born with darker skin than yours?" Caldwell's eyes narrowed at the judge's appearance. "This isn't your concern, Hammond. When a citizen of this territory threatens violence against others, it becomes very much my concern," Hammond replied sternly. "As does your apparent influence over Sheriff Dobbs, who seems to have forgotten his oath of office." Dobbs shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, avoiding the judge's accusing gaze. The other riders with Caldwell-hired guns, by the look of them, glanced at each other uneasily, clearly not having expected to face a territorial judge. I have witnesses who will testify that you arranged the stage robbery attempt, Hammond continued, his voice carrying across the yard. A federal offense, Mr. Caldwell, one that could see you imprisoned for many years, regardless of your wealth or influence in this small corner of the territory. Murmurs ran through Caldwell's men at this revelation. Sheriff Dobbs looked particularly stricken, his gaze darting between Caldwell and the judge. You have no proof, Caldwell blustered, though his confidence seemed to waver. The young man you hired is singing like a canary in exchange for leniency, Hammond lied smoothly. And I've telegraphed the U.S. Marshal's office. They're quite interested in your activities, Mr. Caldwell. It was a bluff, but a convincing one. Several of Caldwell's men began to edge their horses backward, clearly reconsidering their involvement. Seeing his support eroding, Caldwell made a desperate play. Dobbs, he snapped, arrest Drake for interfering with my lawful property rights, but the sheriff had reached his breaking point. No, Lawrence, he said quietly but firmly, Judge Hammond's right, this has gone too far. He turned his horse away from Caldwell, symbolically breaking their alliance. I won't be part of this. With Dobbs's defection, the remaining men lost what little resolve they had left. One by one, they followed the sheriff's example, turning their horses and retreating toward town, until only Caldwell remained, his face contorted with impotent rage. This isn't over, Drake, he snarled, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. Yes, Mr. Caldwell, it is, Rosston replied calmly, his arm around Willow's waist. Go back to Fort Kearny, count your money, build your empire of dollars and cents, but know this: some things can't be bought or bullied into submission. Some things, like love and dignity and basic human decency, are beyond your reach. For a moment, it seemed Caldwell might charge forward alone, driven by his wounded pride. But even he recognized the futility of such an action. With a final venomous glare, he wheeled his horse around and galloped after his departed men, a solitary figure diminishing against the twilight horizon. As he disappeared from view, a collective breath was released among the defenders. Judge Hammond approached Rosston and Willow, a satisfied smile on his weathered face. Well handled, both of you. I doubt Mr. Caldwell will trouble you further, at least not directly. Your bluff about the telegraph and the stage robber was inspired, Judge, Rosston commented with newfound respect. Hammond's eyes twinkled. Who says it was a bluff? I may have sent that telegram after all. And young Mr. Phelps in the Fort Kearny jail might indeed be reconsidering his loyalties. He clapped Rosston on the shoulder. Now, I believe we were in the midst of celebrating your marriage. Shall we continue? The tension broken, the celebration resumed with renewed vigor, the brief confrontation with Caldwell adding an element of triumphant defiance to the festivities. Lanterns and bonfires illuminated the night as music and laughter once again filled the air. Later, as the party continued around them, Rosston and Willow found a quiet moment alone, standing beneath the stars that had witnessed their first meaningful conversation months earlier. Some wedding day, Rosston remarked wryly, drawing her close. I wouldn't change a moment of it, Willow replied, her eyes reflecting the starlight. It was perfectly us overcoming obstacles together, standing against injustice side by side. Rosston smiled, amazed yet again by her resilience and optimism. Have I told you today how much I love you, Mrs. Drake? You have, she confirmed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. But I'll never tire of hearing it. As they stood together under the vast Nebraska sky, Rosston Drake, once a drifter with no place to call home, knew with absolute certainty that he had found where he belonged. Not just on this ranch or in this territory, but by Willow's side, in the circle of her arms, in the future they would build together. Their story had begun with an act of courage and compassion, a cowboy who couldn't stand by while a young woman's tears testified to her unjust treatment. It would continue with countless more acts of the same as they faced life's challenges together, bound by a love that had transformed them both. No one should be sold like cattle, Rosston had declared that fateful evening in Fort Kearny. And in that moment of moral clarity, he had not only saved Willow Pruitt from an undeserved fate, but had unknowingly set himself on the path to his own salvation. The years that followed proved the wisdom of their choices. Rosston studied law under Judge Hammond's guidance, eventually passing the territorial bar examination and establishing a practice in the growing town that sprouted up near the railroad junction 10 miles from Wilson's ranch. Willow realized her dream of founding a school that welcomed children of all backgrounds, teaching not only traditional subjects, but also practical skills and the rich cultural heritage of the diverse peoples who made the West their home. Their family grew with the birth of twin boys, Robert and William, followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Alina after Willow's mother. The children flourished in the loving environment their parents created, growing into confident young people proud of their mixed heritage and committed to the principles of justice and equality their parents exemplified. Caldwell eventually left Fort Kearny, his influence diminished by Judge Hammond's scrutiny and the changing attitudes of the townspeople. He relocated to Chicago, where his wealth bought him entry into society, but according to occasional reports that reached Nebraska, never the respect or happiness he had so desperately craved. Manuel lived to see his grandchildren grow into their teens, passing peacefully in his sleep one winter night, secure in the knowledge that his family was safe and prospering. Carlos married a young woman from a neighboring ranch and established his own horse breeding operation, becoming known throughout the region for his skill and integrity. And Estrella, the black mare with the white blaze who had played such a pivotal role in their love story, lived a long and contented life, eventually producing foals that inherited her intelligence and spirit. Her descendants became prized mounts throughout the territory, carrying the legacy of Willow's gentle training methods and Rosston's steadfast care. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Rosston and Willow returned to the spot where they had first truly connected the porch of the foreman's cabin at Wilson's ranch. Though they now lived in a comfortable home near town, the ranch remained a special place for them, filled with memories of their beginning. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't stopped at that auction? Willow asked as they sat side by side, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. Rosston considered the question, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. I try not to dwell on might have beens, but I do know this stopping that day was the best decision I ever made. Even with all the trouble that followed, she teased, though they both knew the answer, especially with all the trouble, he confirmed, bringing her hand to his lips. Every challenge we faced only proved what I knew from the moment I saw you, that you were worth fighting for, worth staying for. Willow leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment radiating from her. We built a good life, didn't we? Despite everything, the best life, Rosston agreed, gazing out at the land that had become their home. And we're not done yet, Mrs. Drake, not by a long shot. As twilight deepened into night, they remained together on that porch, their love as enduring as the stars that appeared one by one in the vast Nebraska sky. Two people from different worlds, brought together by circumstance but bound by choice. Their shared life a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the unshakable belief that every human being deserves dignity, respect, and the freedom to determine their own destiny. In a wild and often unforgiving West, they had carved out a sanctuary of justice and love, a legacy that would outlive them both and inspire generations to come.